What's up, Fantasy Champions? Spotlight Sports Network is excited to tell you about an amazing deal from Thrive Fantasy, your place for daily fantasy sports and esports. Right now with promo code SS Network, Thrive Fantasy will match up to $50 of your first deposit. So go to thrivefantasy.com and sign up now with promo code SS Network. That's thrivefantasy.com, promo code SS Network. Do you like the Oakland A's? Are you a fan of the Golden Knights? Do you love the Los Angeles Chargers? Well then, my friend, you're in the right place. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show with your host, Jake the Snake SIlva, brought to you by the Spotlight Sports Network.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, it is that time again. We are live on a Monday night. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show, wherever and however you may be watching and listening tonight. Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter Periscope, and of course Twitch. That's where you can follow me on all social media platforms. Watch live and of course listen in live as well. I'm all over the place. I'm on all social media platforms. Definitely check me out at the Snake Sports Talk Show on the Spotlight Sports Network. We have so much to talk about. For first and foremost, by the way, guys, I hope all of you guys are having a great week, and I hope you guys all had a great weekend. I know a lot of people were probably asking where I've been all weekend long. Well, as you know, this is the first episode in a new age at 26. My birthday was Friday. I was out in Utah, and I had such a great time with really good friends. Also, too, trained my dog to being a camping dog. So Jackson's officially ranked up as camping dog. I was happy and excited for it, and it was much needed time away as well as, of course, you know, every time in life, we always need those times away. But at the same time, for those who ask, I had a great birthday. I couldn't have asked for more than that, and I appreciate everybody who took the time, went out of their way, and celebrated and wished me a happy birthday. I appreciate every single one of you guys. 26 to me is definitely a different life-changing perspective. It's one that I'm excited for. I would never trade it for the world. And it's one that's going to be leading to new adventures, much like this adventure that I am traveling with all of you, wherever and however you may be watching it tonight. But I will tell you this, because there is a lot to cover up on this. I am excited for it, and I can't wait to start anytime sooner. So let's go ahead and break things down. So let me just start off with this, because free agency in week 1 is closed up. It's done. We're in week 2. And my God, there were an awful lot of signings. But I want to start out with this, because there were a lot of clear eye openers here, because we talked about the Patriots. We talked about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There are still at least a couple of teams that did very, very well throughout this free agency. It's been a complete, extravaganza. Every single one of the players got paid. Either some of them have left and some of them have either stayed. But that's the fun part about free agency, right? You're either sticking to the culture that you've been stuck around with for a long time and it's grown upon you, or you're going into a new different culture with bigger pay and it's guaranteed. Nothing wrong with that. But there were a couple of things that really kind of sparked my mind through free agency. I already mentioned about New England. I already mentioned about Tampa Bay. There are a few teams that actually did catch my attention. Now, I'm going to break it down to at least a couple of teams. The New York Jets was very interesting. I don't think, at least quite yet, that they're the type of team that's going to make a lot of noise in the AFC this next year. I mean, the Jets are the Jets. Let's be honest. but they did do at least a lot of things that I thought were good. The Corey Davis signing, I'm hoping he's going to be one that's going to come out as an X factor, because I already know what I'm going to get out of Denzel Mims. He's going to be a really good player. He's got really good athletic momentum, and he's got good feet work. So that's the one thing I like about Denzel Mims. Now they're talking about getting another wide receiver, which is really strange, and it's pretty interesting. But, of course, you can't have too much, you really can't have too much of wide receivers in this league, can you? That's usually how it works. But in my opinion with the Jets, they fixed up their offensive line. I think they actually got better defensively. They added in some pass rushers. They added in some real good corners. And I think this is going to be a team that's going to be interesting. They are not going to make too much noise in the AFC, but they'll be the improving team versus what they were this past year, at least getting the number 2 pick in the draft. A couple of teams as well. The Arizona Cardinals, we know a lot of people were thinking they were making so much noise because they get J.J. Watt. They go and get a bunch of these players. But the big one, and I'm going to touch upon this in my next section here in just about a few minutes, but they go and acquire Rodney Hudson, a guy who is not allowed a sack. He's only allowed 1 in 6 years since he's been with the Raiders. I thought it was a much-needed upgrade because why? The one thing the Arizona Cardinals needed to fix was the offensive line. I love Kyler Murray, and I love DeAndre Hopkins and all the weapons that they got, but they also need a run game too. They lose Kenyon Drake. So I think with Arizona, I know what I'm going to get with them. The defense is starting to pick some things up, and I think it's going to be even better when you have J.J. Watt there. And by the way, shout out to my good friend here, Justin Harden, a.k.a. you always know him in Northern California as known as Jay in the Bay. It's always good there. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, man. Shout out to Jay in the Bay. If you haven't done so already, like, subscribe, and hit the bell button for all latest notifications on all San Francisco 49ers content. They were another team that was also really, really, they were really busy as well. The San Francisco 49ers, they went and kept a lot of guys. They even brought in a couple of defensive players, and they also re-signed Trent Williams. That's the most important thing. What is that telling you about San Francisco? They still believe in Jimmy Garoppolo. And I couldn't agree more. I do, but one more injury, that's the only thing. One more injury is what's going to pull me away from him. But let's see what this does. Let's see how this pans out with Kyle Shanahan. This is going to be a team that's going to be much better. They're going to be very improved, and hopefully a lot of players are going to stay healthy. That's the one thing that the 49ers struggled with the most was the health. But they brought a lot of people back. The other team that I thought was very interesting as well, I mean, the Cleveland Browns. What was the one thing that the Browns struggled with massively? Defensive secondaries. They had no legitimate safety in that backfield, let alone their corners. They were getting toasted. By the way, the defense was 21st when it came to scoring defense. It was terrible. They were giving up a lot of points. But they were able to spend their money on offense. They got an offensive line for Baker Mayfield to protect him. They went and got him some weapons like Austin Hooper. They still have OBJ and Jarvis Landry. I still say you should trade away OBJ, get some picks, get some players involved. I think you could still get your worth because Jarvis Landry popped last year when OBJ was on the injured reserve list. And Baker didn't seem so pressurized. He seemed like he was really good. The other part of this is for Cleveland. They go and get John Johnson from the LA Rams. I think he's a legitimate safety. I think he's also another guy that you could play as a specialty corner. This guy could do it all in the secondary. This secondary has been getting better with Cleveland. And I think, to me, this is finally the step in the right direction that the Cleveland Browns have been asking for. They just didn't know how to do it. So Cleveland now is going to be a very tough, legitimate team, and they're going to have to be, because you talk about a division in the AFC North where you got Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and you've got Baltimore knocking on your doors. And by the way, Baltimore, they made it into the wild card. So did Cleveland. Pittsburgh still managed to win the North. But either way, they were knocking on Pittsburgh's door until eventually the tires got blown off in the playoffs. Pittsburgh's relying on one more year out of Big Ben, and I already see this happening because Big Ben is not exactly the same as he was before. Now they go and get Juju Smith-Schuster back, but what difference is that going to make? They lost, they lost offensive linemen. They lost Marquise Pouncey to retirement. Matt Filer is now a member of the Chargers. They lost some offensive linemen. Now it will be interesting to see how the defense shapes up because they're without Bud Dupree in Tennessee. So Pittsburgh had a lot of things nitpicked. Now let's see what happens when there's pressure involved. I guarantee you, you're not going to get the same. You're not going to get the same Big Ben that everybody, apparently Pittsburgh fans, think they're going to get. It's just not going to happen. There are other teams also that I thought was really impressive as well during this whole free agency. I mean, Tennessee went and got themselves some pass rushers. I thought they did really good with that. But it'll be interesting how they maintain with as far as their offense goes because they're going to need some juice. Now, they did get some pass rushers to at least get pressure to the quarterback. That was a must. They lost Jarrell Casey. They lost Cameron Wake. They lost a bunch of real good pass rushers, and they couldn't make up for it. Now they have. I think it's going to be an interesting AFC South. If if I'm looking at it, because you got the Colts, who's got Carson Wentz. They got an offensive line. They're going to be working on a few pieces with their defense, and not to mention the wide receiver core has to be up to speed. I mean, you've got Michael Pittman Jr., who knows what's going to happen with T.Y. Hilton, but everybody's got to be up on the same page. And at this point for the Colts, it is AFC Championship or that's it. Because Carson Wentz has been lowballed. He's been criticized. And Philadelphia was just an absolute mess. But I thought those were the most impressive teams in free agency. There may be about a couple more. Middle of the pack was definitely the Chargers because they finally get an offensive line. Now, the defense, I'd love to see how things shape up with it. But I think Brandon Staley, he's got something cooking. But then there also are, a bunch of other teams as well. Like the Broncos now, they went and got themselves Kyle Fuller. Vic Fangio, as I mentioned, he is a defensive guy. Okay, so he's going to work on defense. But the other thing is, they're not sure about Drew Lock. That's one thing about the Denver Broncos we're not sure of. But it's going to take some time from here. All right, let me shift to this because there are at least a couple of teams I was not impressed with. And some teams that kind of just threw off question marks on my forehead. And it left me with like that shrug emoji that, a lot of us usually use whenever we kind of feel befuddled or confused about a certain situation or conversation. But here's a conversation, and there's two teams I was very surprised of. Because one of them I think is clearly obvious. But let me just talk about one. The Las Vegas Raiders. Here's one thing that I will say about this. And I'm sure a lot of my colleagues, especially Jeff Hammer and, Darian and, of course, Raider J, they're all probably watching this. And I'm sure they're going to be, they're going to love what I will have to say about the Raiders. I always have something to say about every team. That's just how balanced I am. But the Raiders in the last couple days have been making some serious head-scratching moves that I'm just like, what is the deal? Defense was an absolute must, and they needed to get this thing shaped up, or it wasn't going to work. I mean, the defense was a problem. They go and get Gus Bradley, a different defensive-minded coordinator, honestly, by far better than Paul Guenther. I mean, let's be honest. Paul Guenther being John Gruden's right-hand man was not really the right hand for the job. That's the unfortunate part with the Raiders. And you could clearly see that. They go and get defensive pieces. Now, the Yannick Ngakoue deal, I mean, I thought that was great because they get another pass rusher next to Max Crosby, Carl Nassib, and hopefully will fill in the hole with Cleveland Farrell. But the other part of it is they're trying to reshape this secondary. But here's also what's taking a huge toll. They're without three of the starting 5 offensive linemen, Gabe Jackson, Trent Brown, and Rodney Hudson. They're without those 3. And I don't know how the Raiders' offensive line is really going to end up panning this out. I talked with my colleagues about this, and I said this specifically. I even went up into Darian's show, and I ended up speaking my mind about this because this is not good. When you lose one of your premier offensive linemen, especially a center, okay, that's the most important position. Centers, guards, even if you get the tackle, you are working from the inside to the outside, not the outside to the in. Otherwise, you are in a heap of trouble. That's the way it works here in this, in this league. But you lose Rodney Hudson, a guy who only gave up 1 sack out of the 6 years he's been a Raider. He's been phenomenal. One of the top tier best centers in the league. And that really blown my mind, the fact that he's gone and now he's with the Arizona Cardinals protecting Kyler Murray, because that's the one thing Arizona needed was an offensive line. They're going to get a premier one and they're going to build upon it. But the Raiders now, what's going to be interesting about this, and I've already anticipated this happening. Derek Carr, you want to know what's one stat he struggles in? Quarterback rating under pressure. His quarterback rating under the pressure is terrible. It's horrible. What are you going to do with that? Gabe Jackson's now gone to Seattle. Seattle now needs to, they're working their offensive line. They are giving everything to Russell Wilson, and I'm going to touch upon that later. But Gabe Jackson's now gone. Trent Brown, let me be honest, they overpaid for him. He wasn't exactly the top tier tackle. And by the way, he goes back over to New England, of all places. And the Patriots, I'm sure, are going to reshape him just the way that he was before he left. I guarantee it. Richie Incognito comes back, and they go and they sign at least a couple of youngsters. So I don't know what the Raiders' plan is. I mean, my God. This is one that I'm kind of concerned of with the Raiders with this point, because now they don't re-sign Nelson Aguilar. They go and get John Brown. Henry Ruggs has to step up. Now they go and get Kenyon Drake, which I think this is a good upgrade for them, because at least you're going to have 2, if not the 3-headed monsters with Jalen Richard. But Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, and Jalen Richard, I think that's going to be a hell of a run game, especially when you got Kenyon Drake there who can catch and run. I mean, that's a pretty important piece if you ask me. But the offensive line has to produce. They do have good tackles, but now this interior part of the offensive line is going to be a problem. It's going to be an issue. And Derek Carr, with his rating under pressure so bad, and here's what people are going to realize. BL, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is also anticipating more and more of the blame game on Derek Carr. You can believe me or not, but I have seen this way too many times. What more do you want out of Derek Carr, who's completing 70% of his throws, throwing over 4,000 yards, and he's got more touchdowns than picks? Now he barely has an offensive line to work with. He still has some good tackles, but what's that going to do if your interior's exposed? Let alone Josh Jacobs running on the inside. There's not going to be an open hole for them. And worst of all, there's not going to be enough protection. And Derek Carr is going to be hit with the blame game, and it's going to steer it away with John Gruden. And let me just tell you this. What I found out about this, Jack Del Rio, by the way, 25-23 as a head coach of the Raiders. He gets canned. John Gruden, 19-29 since he's become a head coach, and he's only got 7 years of that contract left. The Raiders have to make the playoffs. Otherwise, Mark Davis is going to look at this thing, and he's going to look at it as a complete failure and overpaying for a head coach, which, by the way, he's monetized this brand. The Raiders brand has now been vastly monetized, especially in California and all the West Coast region. I mean, Vegas has now become bleeding silver and black. That's monetizing this brand. And I'll get that. I understand that if that's the case, you got to make your money's worth. But still, if the Raiders are not winning enough games and they're not making the playoffs and they're not doing this and that to improve their future and their franchise, the franchise is going to be in trouble. And that's the way that I look at that. Because ultimately, you've got to build a future, especially a franchise that just moved. It's not going to work good for them. But here's the other thing, too. And now here's another franchise I'm talking about before we go into break. So the Chicago Bears, they were always known for defense. They've never been known to having a quarterback who throws over 4,000 yards. Never had a quarterback who threw for 30-plus touchdowns in a season. They've always been known for their monsters of the midway defense. They've always been known that. Well, these monsters are going to get tired. Khalil Mack, Eddie Jackson, there's going to be about Hakeem Hicks. They're all going to get tired. They're all going to get wore out. Because the fact of the matter is that the Bears, they were in this conversation about Russell Wilson. They could not even pull the trigger, and instead, they settled for Andy Dalton. So now he's basically beige water bear. And ultimately, it's like you look at Chicago, and they're again butchering all their quarterbacks. Good Lord. I mean, my thing about this is with the Bears, they've butchered so many quarterbacks over the years that the only successful ones have been Jim McMahon and Jake Cutler. In my opinion, the rest of them have all been butchered. I liked Caleb Haney at the time, but they couldn't even give him a protection. And they go and get Mitch Trubisky. You sold people moving up to number 2 in the draft to go in and settling for a kid who only played 1 year in his senior year in North Carolina, and Mitch Trubisky. Now he's backing up Josh Allen in Buffalo. So you let go of him, knowing you're still paying Nick Foles. All this other, it's a mess. It's a complete mess in Chicago, and I don't know what they're doing. I mean, you want to talk about being all in on Seattle, which initially Seattle they turned down the deal, which to me I thought was smart because for one, Seattle, they'll be irrelevant without Russell Wilson. That's a fact. They will be irrelevant without him. But at least now they finally answered every single one of the needs he wants. Offensive line. He doesn't want to be pressured and sacked majority of the times, no matter how mobile he is. And at the same time, too, you got to give him offensive weapons. You got to end up getting him a defense, too. They need pass rushers. Seattle has got to make this thing work. Otherwise, kiss the playoffs goodbye. Because that's initially what's going to happen. Players get tired out very quickly if the system does not work right. If they don't end up fixing this, if they don't fix this right away, that's what's going to happen with this franchise. I already see this and anticipate this. But the Chicago Bears, you butchered Deshaun Watson. You butchered Patrick Mahomes. You butchered a lot of these big-time quarterbacks. For what? Take a risk at times. Because here's the thing. Defenses, you can work them through the draft. And at the same time, you could go and get veteran pieces. But if you don't have the star quarterback that's going to produce you, offense and points, you're in big trouble. Because you got Allen Robinson, who is a for sure number 1. I'm not sure how I feel about Kevin Mooney or Anthony Miller. I don't know about them yet. But you could always get more wide receivers in the draft. I mean, God, there's a truckload of them. The run game with David Montgomery, I think he improved, but you're probably going to need at least more fresh legs. And you're going to need an offensive line. That's the one thing that the Chicago Bears, I don't understand what Ryan Pace is doing. I mean, amongst both these general managers, Mike Mayock and Ryan Pace, I don't know what they're doing. But these are some of the concerns. The Raiders have to make the playoffs, and they've got to fix this interior of the O-line. Not to mention, too, you're hoping that these weapons are going to work. I mean, Kenyon Drake, I already know for sure. He's going to work well with Josh Jacobs. That's a no-doubter. The Bears, you butcher this quarterback thing again, and you settle for Andy Dalton, of all people. You could have settled for at least a couple of other quarterbacks, like maybe Marcus Mariota, or you probably could have, solidified your problems until the next big thing came. But at this point, I don't know what both these franchises are doing. Those were the two franchises through free agency I just had the biggest concerns of. I don't understand what they were doing. Coming up next, it's interesting because a lot of people were freaking out about LeBron James. It's been kind of interesting. He's out indefinitely with a high ankle sprain, and people are starting to freak out. And then a lot of people are starting to rant and rave about a lot of these teams. I'm going to discuss about the Western Conference and what we need to expect out of them coming up next, because it's not going to hurt anything with the Lakers. And speaking of which, by the way, we do want to end up paying our respects. We had gotten news reports earlier that the great Elgin Baylor, who was one of the Laker greats, Hall of Famer as well, has unfortunately left us and has passed away at the age of 86. Elgin Baylor was a really, really good player, won some championships in his era and in his decades. And thoughts and prayers to the Baylor family. I know it's a tough time, but at the same time, this was a great life lived. So Elgin Baylor, you'll always be up in our hearts, and we will always remember you, and you'll never be forgotten. And the moments and the memories you've had in the purple and gold. That's the best thing for for the Lakers and the best times they've had with him. But it's sad news. But ultimately, all of us at Spotlight Sports Network, we pay our respects and our dues, and thoughts and prayers to the Baylor family for peace and comfort at this time. All right. So, by the way, with this setup, let me just tell you something. Microphone, headsets, all this other stuff. There's an app out there that wouldn't even need all of this equipment required. Isn't that crazy? Well, there's an app for that. It's called Media, Meedia. Media is the perfect app you can download on the App Store or on Google Play. And what's nice about this is you get features. You get different backgrounds that you could customize. You can also end up customizing where you're your own personal PR or you're taking interviews or whatnot. You're your own personal PR at the palm of your hand on your mobile device, on your smartphone, a lot of different devices. And you guys can produce out content at any point. And what's nice about it is the content is produced all over on all social media platforms. So you'll be able to break down and cover a lot of breaking news in sports, in all of your favorite sports, without all of the necessary equipments like your laptop, your microphone, all this other stuff. All of it is just ready for you to record at the palm of your hand. Download Media today. Meedia, available now on the App Store and on Google Play.
Once a Raider, bruh, always a Raider, bruh. Shit simple as that. You look silver and black. Lot of bread invested in that O-line. Car insurance cost the arm and the leg to reach that goal line. It's go time.
Be famous? Do you really want to be a superstar? Do you really want to get dangerous? Do you even know where the groupies are? Bitches out here be...
Welcome to Hammer's house.
Those of you guys that are looking at some other shows here on the Spotlight Sports Network, feel free to check out Jeff Hammond, aka Hammer and Hammer's House. He'll be having a new I'll be having a new podcast coming out as well. Stay tuned for that. Definitely check out Key in the Building for all Philadelphia sports content. The Philadelphia Eagles, the Flyers, the Sixers, and the Phillies. She's got you covered all on that on Key in the Building. Check out Gang Green David for all your die-hard New York Jets content. And also check out our good friend Darius Darian Hopkins over at the Spotlight Raiders Talk here on the Spotlight Sports Network for everything die-hard Raiders content. You don't want to end up missing that. Oh, free agency, I will say this. I mean, it was a lot. It was absolutely just a lot of fun. I was very excited for a lot of these different moves. And for one, I'll be talking a lot about the March Madness tournament, because right now, like, I look at a bunch of these programs and whatnot, it still is fun to me. I mean, March Madness has absolutely been it's absolutely been a fun type of tournament for me, especially when I get excited on birthday week, because that's usually initially when it starts. It starts right there in the middle of March, and it's the best time. It's the best time around. I have a lot of fun watching all of these tournaments. And so what I will be doing on my best for last is I'll be going through a lot of these memorable moments that I've seen in March Madness. I mean, it's been fun so far. It's been fun so far. And I had just seen at least a couple of scores. Florida State downs Colorado. They're moving on. Michigan defeats LSU. Right now, it's USC and Kansas right now are playing, and USC's up 40-21 currently. And the big game right now, Alabama against Maryland. Alabama is up 86-70, getting close to the end of the second half. But it's been really, really good. So I will say this, because this past weekend really gave me, I experienced a victory this weekend. I experienced a big-time victory this weekend. And I think it's one that's become very memorable in my life. And for those who know me and those who don't, let me just tell you this. There have been a lot of things to overcome in my life. I will not break down to it because of personal reasons, but there were a lot of things that I had to overcome to get to the point of where I am today. So this weekend, I experienced a victory. So, and this is not like one of those ordinary types of victories either. Like, no. This is one that's really, really special to me. So, of course, camping out this weekend was a great time. There were a couple of things that were happening. I mean, Mother Nature always loves to show herself. And at the time, my thing is like, my pops really wanted to get me into fly fishing. And I definitely wanted to try for the first time in my life. A lot of people have told me the ins and outs about fly fishing. It's a life changer. It's one that opens up your eyes to so many different possibilities. And so for me, this weekend, I was actually happy enough. So I was fly fishing with my pops and with a couple of really good friends of ours. We had our entire group. It's a lot of fun. I go out Saturday, day after my birthday. We decide to go and fly fish. I'm going to go and give this thing a try. I've tried a couple times just to narrow down the technique and everything else. And it was tough. I had like 3 bites, through that time fly fishing. And it was challenging. It was absolutely challenging to the point where it was messing with my head. And I had to overcome that fear. I had to not just a fear, but I had to overcome a battle that was going on in my mind mentally. And it seemed like no matter how many times I was trying to at least get a hit on this fly rod, I almost was to the point where I was going to throw the towel in. Like it was not going to happen. And by the way, I've got wind, I've got rain, I got snow, I got all the elements just right in my face. Right there, my presence is there with all those elements. It was difficult. But at the same time, one thing that I thought was amazing is that even throughout all of that, and me having this mental tug of war with my mind, just right there was a victory. Out of all the elements and out of all the things that happened, I just so happened to have caught a fish for the first time on the fly rod. And this thing was massive. This thing was a 25-inch big fish. And those that, have seen my personal profile, you can look at this thing. This thing is enormous. I mean, my God, this thing was a 25-incher. The thing was a fatty. But there was a victory behind that, because no matter how many times that you just looked at yourself and you're just ready to throw the towel in, you are ready to just throw this thing in. Like, life's not going to get better. I've been doing a lot of different stuff to reshaping my life in 26, and I'm going to go with it wholeheartedly, and I'm excited about this. So I've been taking a lot of different vacations and a lot of adventures. I love it. And that's one of the things that's a complete life changer for me. So why is this significant? Well, here's the thing. LeBron James out indefinitely with a high ankle sprain. A lot of people are thinking that the Lakers are basically done. Like, the Lakers, they got no chance at them. Without LeBron, without at least their big time star that's going to help them to get into the playoffs and so much more, and even win a second championship. Let me just tell you something about, the Lakers, because right now, this is what I look at it. You got Utah, Phoenix, the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Nuggets and the Trailblazers. And then a couple of teams that are right down below: San Antonio, Dallas, Golden State, and Memphis. Let me give you a reality check here with all these teams. Okay, Utah is the second best team in the Western Conference. They're the second best team in the Western Conference. Why do I say that? Because the Lakers, even being without LeBron, and a lot of these big time players, the Lakers find a way to really overcome a lot of adversities. What's going on, Pat? What's happening? So being without LeBron, now, of course, the timetable is questionable, but it doesn't mean that the Lakers are completely out. We saw this from last year. We thought, okay, Lakers are off to a hot start. They get into the playoffs, and there you go. They make it all the way past a lot of these teams, and they win a championship, despite the bubble. The Utah Jazz are the second best team in the Western Conference. Phoenix right now, they either are sitting 3 or 4. Listen, I could tell you this right now in the Western Conference. I mean, it's anybody's ball game. But it's the ones that are willing to close those things out. I mean, Utah had a lot of real good pieces, but they could never get past a lot of these big time teams. It was unfortunate. And he's doing good. He's doing really, really good, Pat. We actually just went fishing this past weekend, and we caught a bunch of fish up out there in Utah, man. It was awesome. But I love what the Utah Jazz are doing. I mean, Rudy Gobert, he was the guy that first caught COVID last year, and it just basically seems like never shook him up. Never, like it never even happened. So the Utah Jazz, they've got a lot of things they have to work with, but if they really want this championship badly, they have got to step things up, especially when it's playoff time. There's no time of hitting the brakes, any of that. They have to go full head on. That's the only way that some of these teams are really going to pan it out. The Phoenix Suns, they've made some improvements, but is it enough really to be considered, is it enough to really kind of consider, a championship? I don't know. This is still a young core team. It's really going to separate a lot of the boys from the men. I like what Phoenix has done, and I love what Chris Paul is doing. But this is interesting. And the Lakers are going to be fine. They are going to be fine. We've seen this we've seen this over and over again. We talk about this with Tom Brady. Tom Brady was going to be fine in Tampa. In fact, Tampa goes and wins a championship. The Lakers with Anthony Davis and LeBron James, they go and win a championship. A lot of these long-time players, they understand what it means to be criticized. They understand what it means to be lowballed. But it never stops them. Never stops them. The Lakers and LeBron and Anthony Davis, they're going to be fine. They're going to be just fine. They're going to be back to exactly where they want to be at. They'll still continue to be competitive. They'll be just fine, folks. This is not something to where right now we should just be crazy about. This is not a time and place for it. And if anything else, I mean, like I said, it's not a time. Not exactly the time. And a lot of these teams, like I said, they're going to be very competitive. They're going to be very competitive teams. And look at what's happening with the Nets. I mean, my God, they stacked up so many players. Why? Because of LeBron's greatness. This is the reason why that nobody should even be freaking out about what's going on with the Lakers. Okay, they're going to be just fine. You know, with all of this stuff. Listen, I was just fine. You know, I may have overcame a battle in my mind for one, thinking that I was not going to end up catching this fish, but it happened. LeBron James, okay, he suffered a high ankle sprain, but it's not like he's going to be out forever. It's going to take some time. They're taking it easy because they know exactly what his greatness is in the playoffs. That's all it is. Much needed rest. Stop freaking out. I know how this whole deal works. All right, guys, time for the hot press. So it doesn't seem like it gets better and better in Houston, to be honest. So latest reports on Deshaun Watson, because there are 6 more lawsuits that have been filed against Deshaun Watson already after just a lot. Oh, man. So 6 more lawsuits, allegedly sexual assault and inappropriate conduct, were filed against Deshaun Watson on Monday, including one that alleges that the Houston Texans quarterback sexually assaulted a woman this month. The attorney representing the women, Tony Busby, he's filed 13 lawsuits against Watson since last week. 13. This is interesting. I just don't understand this. But again, I don't understand this. I really, really don't. He just like my thing of this is, because I know the difference between mainstream media and actual media. Okay. I'm not boasting. I'm trying, I'm trying to be as least as professional as I possibly could about this. So please, I'm not boasting on anything, but there does kind of come to a point where when you get a lot of these lawsuits and a lot of this stuff, what reason is for this? You know, if this is an actual, here's my thing. If this is an actual, discrepancy in a lot of this other, I mean, I am totally against that stuff. I really, really am, because for one, I do fight for justice. Absolutely. But in the best way possible. But in this particular case, because there are so many lawsuits filed, I'm just like, well, how many more is this going to stack? I mean, you're literally giving this attorney all of his money's worth. I don't know. I mean, to me, I'm very befuddled by this. I'm not saying that this is not a bad thing, because it is. It's one that's very sensitive to some people. But still, I mean, this is a lot. If this is just money compensation or any of this stuff, this is why I have to look at it is, if this is legit, then okay. Then one, I can definitely defend. But in this case, there's so much of it. It's crazy. So, by the way, the New York Giants is one other team I have not been able to talk about lately. But this is also a team that's really done really, really good in the in free agency. And I thought they did fantastic, and they did a lot of good stuff. They got Kenny Galladay. They ended up getting a bunch of really good players. Even they go and get Kyle Rudolph. They get an offensive line. This is all because they're trying to prove this with Daniel Jones. There's no more waiting. They want the team. They need him to make the playoffs. They need him to get this team to the playoffs. Enough said. So the Giants ended up landing Adoree Jackson, 3 years, $39 million with a $26 million guarantee. So the Giants have made some serious moves. And again, I was skeptical about what the Giants were going to do because they did lose a lot of defensive players and they lost a lot of big-time key players that I thought were very important. But this is now not going to be the case. The Giants know they're in a terrible division with the Eagles dysfunctional, the Cowboys. We'll see how they perform by the end of the year. Then Washington, they go and get Fitzpatrick, but it'll be interesting to see how the Washington football team really favors out. I thought they did really good defensively. That's not my problem. But man, the Giants are really making some serious moves. And if you think about it, this is what New York needs, damn it. This is what New York needs. They need juice. They need something to get this back into the city. The Jets have been making moves. The Giants have been making moves. New York has got to get juice back into that city again. And I feel like right now the Giants are doing specifically that. And they're pushing Daniel Jones to his absolute limit to get them into the playoffs. And I don't blame them. You get an offensive line, you get a defense, and you get offensive weapons. It's got to happen. It is really got to happen. So, so here's what's interesting, and I'm looking at this at least from a little bit of, a little bit of some stories and some topics from here, but it's been kind of interesting. But I thought this was kind of fascinating in my opinion. So now a Lions defensive end, Michael Brockers. Now, remember, Michael Brockers, while he was an LA Ram before getting traded to Detroit, he had some choice of words for Jared Goff. And when they got the news about Matthew Stafford coming to the Rams with a trade with Jared Goff and a bunch of draft picks, he believed it was an upgrade. So apparently news reports are saying that Michael Brockers, the now newly acquired Detroit Lion, who's his teammate, Jared Goff, ended up apologizing to Jared Goff about the tweet and about the remark. But I just feel like that this is a chip. This is just a chip on Jared Goff's shoulder. And I love this. Jared Goff has something to prove because he breaks the thumb, beats the Seahawks in the playoffs with that broken thumb. And by the way, he's won 40 plus, he's won 40 games. What do you want him to do? Jared Goff can prove himself to be a winning type quarterback. But why is it, this is one that's going to be very interesting for me. But the both of them made up. And one I thought was very interesting for Michael Brockers to even come out and say that. But I'm sure it was an awful lot of awkwardness in the locker room. Not even going to lie about that. But at the same time, one that needed to happen because now you're both teammates. You got to square some things up. But Jared Goff, he's going to have the season of his life this year. I think he's going to have the season of his life. There's a huge chip on his shoulder. There's no doubt about that. But we'll see exactly what happens, for the Detroit Lions next year. But I'm not saying they're going to be a playoff threat because they still need a lot of help. They need some wide receivers. They need a lot of stuff. Detroit is such a mess of a franchise. They need a lot of help. But I thought this was very interesting, and I'll touch upon this here in a second. But that was your hot press, folks. So this is one that I really want to get into because Jared Goff, I don't think people realize, but he's playing with a serious chip on his shoulder, and I love this. Because the Rams are an aggressive team. They live in Los Angeles. It's an aggressive city. Okay? They're all about they need to make the playoffs. They need to win. They need to win championships. They need to be a winning city. It's a coast-to-coast thing. So the Rams Go and get Matthew Stafford for Jared Goff. A lot of people, I talked about this. Why would the Rams get rid of Jared Goff? There were a lot of different potentialities. Won the game against Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers with Nick Mullins was one of the reasons why that they got rid of him. Maybe. Or the fact that, he's a silent type of guy. He doesn't really talk much. Whatever the case may be. But all I know is that communication was not sound between Jared Goff and the Rams, from what I was told. And for me, I've never had anything when it came to, Jared Goff. I never had to. Because Jared Goff can win games. So I never saw an issue or a problem. But it's fascinating to me because all of this stuff, and Jared Goff, by the way, when he was introduced to the Detroit Lions, he came out and he said that he's got a chip on his shoulder. And if I'm looking at this correctly, because, this is going to be one that the Rams, I have to say, like it's going to be interesting to see how this season really pans out for them. But I truly think the Rams are going to be better. The Rams are definitely going to be a better team. And by the way, the Detroit Lions are on the road. They're going to Los Angeles. We're not sure yet, but I'm going to guarantee you something. It's probably going to be the game of Jared Goff's life. When he goes into that building in Los Angeles in SoFi Stadium and faces against his former team in the LA Rams. This is one that I could tell you right now is going to be a hell of a game because this is going to be a statement game. Be prepared for it, folks. I know Detroit is not the best ran franchise, but if Jared Goff is really going to prove something here for himself in his career, this is going to be the opportunity to do it. This is going to be the absolute opportunity to do it. And he's got the biggest chip on his shoulder, and I can't wait to see what that's going to look like in Detroit, and especially against the LA Rams. I'm kind of excited for it. But again, I think it's going to be interesting. I'm not saying that it's going to be a big-time difference for the Detroit Lions because they're so, ran down of a franchise. But I'm just saying this. When they face the LA Rams, that's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting game. But all I know is there's a lot of stuff cooking. Anyway, so my best for last, I will definitely be talking about this, about, some memorable moments in March Madness since it's currently going on as of right now. And there have been a couple of real good games. I have not seen so much of it, but I have caught recaps, and I think it's been really, really good. But by the way, guys, if you haven't done so already, for all of you fantasy geeks and gurus out there, far and wide, coast to coast, you guys love playing fantasy sports, and you guys also love winning cold hard cash. Well, there's an app there for you guys and a place you could go to online called Thrive Fantasy. Go online to thrivefantasy.com or download Thrive Fantasy on your smartphone on the Apple App Store and Google Play. And what's nice about this feature is when you sign up in your first pool play, you put in $20 into your first deposit, use promo code SS Network. That's short for Spotlight Sports Network. They'll match it up to $50 into your first play. You can win up to $15,000 in your first ever pool play. It's a lot of fun. And I guarantee you're going to win some money off of this, and you guys are going to have so much fun. But Thrive Fantasy, there's so much that you could go through, and you could even bet on esports. That's the best part about this. Definitely go online, Thrive Fantasy, download the app today, promo code SS Network, thrivefantasy.com, promo code SS Network.
Welcome to the My City, My Game pod show featuring Raider J77, your place for all things Raiders and all things Trailblazers. Brought to you by the Spotlight Sports Network. Make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Now let's go.
Alrighty, folks. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank all of you guys for coming on here onto the show. Really do appreciate it on a Monday night. I hope all of you guys are staying safe and healthy as well. We're basically right here at the end of the curve. I mean, things are starting to open up. Things are starting to get better and better everywhere. And a lot of these no mask mandates are starting to come out. Vaccines are starting to come out. I think we're all going to be just fine by the time the summertime arrives. And I'm excited for it. I can't wait. I think it's going to be great. And we'll see exactly what happens from down the stretch. But I think it's going to be really good. By the way, so my best for last, it's going to be really, really good. But March Madness has been quite the tradition for a long, long time. We were without it last year. And I'm happy enough that March Madness is back. I'm happy enough that we're able to just watch it again. Because a lot of these young kids, they never got a chance to really showcase their skills come the NBA draft. It was tough. But at the same time, you know, each and every single one of them, they're playing to the absolute hardest. Now, it's interesting because there's no Duke. There's no, like, these top-tier programs in basketball that we're all used to seeing every single year. So I'm kind of interested to see how this really pans out. But one thing that I could tell you, it is going to be very strange. It's going to be very interesting to see how the rest of this tournament goes. To me, I don't think it's a big time, like, legitimate tournament, but it still is one for the books that I think a lot of us are going to end up remembering. I think personally, it's one I really do see. It's going to be one that I think a lot of people are just going to look back at this and they're just going to go, whoa, wow. I mean, we were still managing to be able to, you know, get this tournament going. A lot of people, you know, a lot of players and a lot of these youngsters were able to showcase their stuff. So let's look back at a bunch of big time memories from here. So one thing that I do love from March Madness, I mean, despite it being in my birthday week, because that's the best time. I get excited for it every year, filling out the bracket. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to fill out my bracket this year, but I've still been keeping up with a lot of these teams. So let's think of some really good memories. So Loyola Chicago, they are in the tournament. And I remembered it the year when they got so far. I was actually pulling for Loyola Chicago to really just be the difference-making program, because we haven't really seen one of those in such a long time. But, you know, we remember one of their, you know, the biggest hype persons that was there for the program. Such a sweet, sweet lady. And Loyola, like, was such an interesting program. They were such an interesting group. And this was a team nobody was expecting. None of them were expecting of it whatsoever. And they were coming out like a tough team. Loyola Chicago, let's see exactly what happens with them down the stretch. But I remember that year when they were making a lot of noise. It's unfortunate that it got cut they went down close, but were not able to seal the rest of the deal. And they were such a tough team. They were such a tough program. I thought a lot of the gentlemen that were playing, they did such a great job, but that was a team that I thought made some noise. Wichita State, that year that they were undefeated. Now, they didn't get as far to the Final Four of the championship. It's unfortunate for Wichita State because this was a team, I think, in the middle of it, and this happens with a lot of these programs. They get caught up in the record deals For one, because number one, they were an undefeated team. They wanted to keep it that way. They wanted to be the most intimidating team in the tournament. Nobody could deny that. But when you're facing against top tier programs like North Carolina, Duke, Villanova, a lot of these real good top tier programs in basketball, it's kind of near impossible to really stay undefeated for so long. And Wichita State was a hell of a story and were a real good program. But I think at the end of it, once they got cut short, that was kind of the end of the deal. That was the end of the stick. But they tried their hardest. Nobody can deny that. And I think at the end of this, I think they're going to be a very interesting program for the next couple of years. I don't see them as far as making a big jump like they did that year. But man, when they were undefeated, that was a hell of a story. I loved watching it. Oh man, that Kentucky team, when it came to John Wall, Anthony Davis, Michael Gilchrist, and DeMarcus Cousins, this was the most unbelievable Kentucky team I've watched. I mean, this was a team that was just pushing everybody around. They were pushing Duke around. They're pushing a lot of these different programs around. That Kentucky Wildcats team was one that they had a lot of really good defenders. They also had a lot of real good shooters. But, man, they were such a tough team. And there were a lot of different tough groups over the years when you look at it in history. But this was one that I thought was memorable to me. That Kentucky team was really, really good. I thought it was great. Kansas defeating Memphis in the championship. I called this one. A lot of people, I think people might remember this, but remember Derrick Rose when he was part of Memphis? Yeah, that was a tough outing. Derrick Rose was making serious noise. And what's interesting about that game, because I called Kansas, because Kansas's group had something that I thought was interesting. This was a group that was very manageable. They were able to manage their shots, the time clock on the floor, and they managed to be clutch against a tough Memphis team that a lot of people had high hopes for. Kansas got it done. Kansas won the national championship, and that was one that I think a lot of us put in the books. I thought that was great. I thought initially, when I look at it from March Madness history, I mean, a tough team with Derrick Rose, who was potentially going to be the number one overall pick and lands in Chicago. I mean, that was a guy that was lights out everywhere. And Kansas was able to get the job done. They beat Memphis and they were crowned champions. Oh man, how can we not forget about Zion? How can we not forget about the years of Zion and Duke? I mean, watching this kid, everybody was pushing for Zion to get to the national championship, and it didn't happen. But I thought that was probably the biggest rave of the stories, because the other notables, you think of Taco Fall for one, in that program. Ja Morant was some of these players that were coming up in that year of the draft. Ja Morant, Zion, and Taco Fall, Bowl. Some people would think at Oregon was going to make a difference. These guys were very interesting, but Zion made so much noise in his freshman year of Duke that it was unimaginable. It was unbelievable. I mean, a guy who is athletic, strong, stocky, and is a guy that literally does everything. Zion's going to be a household name for years in the NBA. But man, that memory from him in college to the tournament, good Lord, that was a hell of an outing. And people didn't even care. That's the funny thing. They freaked out at that time when they didn't make the national championship for Duke and for Coach K. But they didn't even care after that, because they were just like, dude, Zion rocked it in Duke. Zion rocked it in college. That was all everybody remembered, was what Zion was doing at that time in college, getting into the tournament, initially lost and fell short, but he was very impactful. I would say he was very impactful. There was an awful lot of really good championships that I do remember. I mean, for one, for me, like, I loved the year that North Carolina won it when Tyler Hansborough was such a big name. Like, that was one that I really, really liked. And that North Carolina team, because again, the two powerhouses, North Carolina and Duke, outside of a lot of these other powerhouse programs, those were two that they didn't like each other. That was two that were very competitive. I mean, Coach Krzyzewski and, of course, the coach from North Carolina, they were both legendary, and they knew how to control their groups. North Carolina that year, they took it all the way to the house. And even for so many different tough stretches, that was massive. And I thought it was great. I thought it was awesome watching North Carolina win that championship. But that was a team that was filled with defenders and was also had some real good quality shooters. And man, did they get that job done. Oh, how can we not forget about the upsets to number one seeds? We've seen so many of them over the years in college basketball. The biggest one, I cannot remember it, but it was a number one seeded team. They're facing against the lowest seed in the tournament, in their region, and they get upset by them. That was tough because that was a team that was ranting and raving. A lot of people saw maybe make the championship, maybe make the Final Four, maybe even get close to, the Elite Eight. But even that was not enough for them to God, they were all over the place. I could not remember specifically what that game was, but man, we've seen so many of those big time upsets to number one seeded teams. It's unfathomable. And it's one that really kind of catches a lot of people's attention. And I do believe that was crazy. That was the craziest year. And that was one that screwed up everybody's brackets, but it always does. It always does for a lot of people that, they enjoyed filling out these brackets and they love playing in these tournaments. It hurt them. It hurt them big time. Yeah, that's about as much memories as I could possibly think of for March Madness. There are still a few of them. I have so many of them. But those ones right there are at least the closest that I could think of. But those were some great years. I mean, honorable mentions, Virginia winning the tournament was crazy because it threw a lot of people off. They thought Duke, they thought this, that. Virginia had some shooters. They had some real good shooters. It's an honorable mention because I don't think it got too much of the hype because nobody expected it. Let me just tell you, is Gonzaga ever going to end up winning a championship? I have been waiting years and years and years and years to seeing if Gonzaga was going to end up making it because that's a program for a long amount of years. They've had talent. They've had so many of these guys. They just could not finish the job. I don't understand, and I don't know why. But if they could pull this off for this year, again, I'm anticipating Gonzaga is going to win the whole thing. And they're probably going to need to because this is a time and this is a year where it's so interesting. It's so interesting to everybody in the college basketball world. But if Gonzaga gets it done, good for them. But if they don't, I feel like they'd be an overhyped program that they can't get the job done, but no matter how far that they go. So this is the year, Gonzaga. Make it happen. But for a lot of these different programs, it's interesting. But again, it's an enjoyable tournament. I don't think it's one that's super hyped, but it's still an enjoyable tournament either way, because at least we have the tournament back. That's one positive note that we can really kind of note to ourselves. But thank you all so much for watching here on the Spotlight Sports Network and the Snake Sports Talk Show. We will see you guys tomorrow night, Tuesday night. Have a great night. Take care.